What's wrong with corporate charity? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, an interesting question was raised by one of our members this week that I had already been thinking about because of something in my own other job workplace. The idea that businesses are charitable entities. So they are for-profit businesses, and they participate, for example, in United Way, or they encourage their employees to volunteer at local charities, and they give them paid time off to do so. Or they take a portion of your paycheck. You see a lot of companies advertising products that say X percentage of what you give is going to be donated to charity. Bill, this sounds like just a kind of a free market thing to do. But on the other hand, does it matter who's redistributing my income?
Yeah. When you were listing those examples, I think you gave three, and it was like, I remember thinking, great idea, miserable idea. And the miserable idea was when you said something was being deducted from somebody's paycheck. Now, presumably that means deducted without their permission.
No. Well, there are ways that corporations essentially deduct without permission by saying 5% of every sale is going to some charity, okay, and that money could otherwise have gone into the employee's pocket.
I understand. So, look, we've talked about this a few times, Scott, how after having watched the left do so much encroaching on our liberties and freedoms and everything else, that sometimes we get into a knee-jerk kind of reaction, and it puts us in a bad moral place or even a silly moral place. Because a great example of this was, I remember we were doing a trifecta show about a runner who had fallen down and another runner had stopped and helped her up and helped her across the finish line. And we said we thought that was a noble thing to do. And we had a number of people say, it's communism, it's not her job to help the other person finish the race, which is absolutely correct. But the essential point here is that person was not colluded, or I should say forced, right? There was no force applied to that person to stop and help the person that had gone down. Yes, she threw away her first place finish to help another runner, but she did that on her own.
Well, Bill, obviously you've never worked for a large corporation that was running a United Way campaign. If you don't think that there's force applied in those voluntary contributions, you just haven't lived in corporate America.
Okay, well, it's true enough I haven't. I lived in it long enough to be to register a complaint that I had to take a sexual misconduct class when I'm not guilty of any sexual misconduct. I don't need a class that that teaches me that I'm not supposed to inappropriately touch or rape the women on the staff. But put that aside, Scotty. My entire attitude towards this, it can be summed up in that one word, which is volition, which is essentially freedom. The idea that a group of people working in a corporation that's producing a great deal of wealth, and they voluntarily decide that they would like to do some good with that money, then I think that's absolutely fantastic. I think the American people are the most generous people in the world, in the history of the world. And when people say that the federal government is very, we say, oh, all this money in foreign aid, and you hear other people saying, America doesn't spend that much on foreign aid compared to its national product. And it's true, the government doesn't. But the private giving done by American citizens, I think, is certainly equal to the rest of the world combined. I'd be astonished if it wasn't. So the idea that helping people out and doing things that look like charity or look like handouts, that this is a moral evil, is a position that we have found ourselves in only because we've been told that this is something that we have to do, either legally or we've been told that we have a moral obligation to do this. And this is the distinction. I don't think anybody has a moral obligation to give time or money to charitable causes. It destroys the definition of charity.
For years and years, American people have voluntarily gone to the polls and freely elected people who have then got into office and voted from the public treasury for various charitable enterprises like feeding and housing the poor and medical care and things like that.
This is the point I was about to make. That's not a charitable enterprise. If somebody takes my money by force, which is what taxation does, and then they spend it on whatever cause, and even assume for the moment, although it's a ridiculous assumption, even assume for the moment that the government didn't even take a percentage of that, because the government obviously operates at a profit. But if it's taken from me by force, then it is not charity. It's the definition of charity is to voluntarily dedicate time, resources, money, or whatever the case may be, out of the kindness of your heart to help people who you perceive to be in need.
You're taking that to an individual level, which is not the case in a corporation that decides to allocate a portion of its collective product to charity.
Look, it is all very clear to me. I don't have any problem with this at all. This is a crystal clear example to me. If a corporation tells somebody that we're going to pay you $20 an hour, and in addition to the taxes that are withheld from that, they also say we're going to withhold another $5 an hour for charitable purposes, then that person has an opportunity to decide to work somewhere else, and I would advise them to do that, because that's not charity. That's just plain, it's just another form of taxation. It's stealing. If, on the other hand, the company hires people at $20 an hour and pays them $20 an hour, and the board of directors and the president and everybody else decide that we want to take a portion of our profits, a portion of our revenues in order to do some good, and even if it's to do some good in order for the publicity that would result from it, which is part of the business equation, I don't have any moral problem with that at all. The idea that helping people is immoral is, again, it's one of these knee-jerk reflections. I understand it. I do. I completely understand it, because we have been told for 3 generations now that you must give us your money in order to help these people, and it's made people bitterly resent the entire idea of helping people who are in greater need. And I am against this coercive stealing of your money under the fig leaf of, hey, we're doing good with it. My whole career is dedicated against that. But with that said, a corporation has the right to do with its own profits whatever it wants to. Employees, by definition, I think, are not profit sharers. As long as those employees are getting their full salaries, then the corporation can do with whatever its additional revenues, it can do whatever it wants to.
Well, that's a great point. You just said as long as the employees are getting their full salaries. Let's take it out of the very personal level of salaries. Let's just say that an organization has been running for years and they are underfunding a certain aspect of their business, so that employees are suffering as a result of that, and they could use the extra money to have a better job life, to have a more comfortable work surroundings. But instead, the company, because it wants to look good in the community, says we're going to take 5% of all of our revenues and spread it around. We're not doing it to be charitable. We're doing it because we want an article in the newspaper that says XYZ Corporation gave $50,000 to this charity.
Again, the lovely thing about having a consistent set of principles is that they're consistent and they're principles. Let's take that exact example where employees are being underpaid in order for a corporation to do these public works and so on. What you're basically saying, and this is precisely what's happening, is that this private company that this individual decided to work for is spending more money on advertising than they are on their personnel. That they are shorting the personnel side of their business ledger at the expense of the advertising side, because in a case like that, that's what charity is. It's simply advertising. It's just virtue advertising. And look, again, in that case, what am I supposed to say? That the government should say that you're not allowed to do this? No. If it turns out that you feel that you're being underpaid because the company you work for is dedicating revenue that really should have gone to the employees in order to do these public good projects that simply make the corporation look good, well, that's advertising. And you work for a company that is spending too much money on advertising, not enough money on personnel, and I would recommend that you find yourself another job.
So wouldn't it be better for the corporation to say to its employees, listen, we would like to be able to be helpful to our community. We owe a lot to the community. In many cases, a lot of these corporations have received tax breaks to come to these communities. So we'd like to be able to do that, but we don't want to do that in an involuntary fashion. So all we're going to say is we encourage you, we're going to pay you a little extra, but we encourage you to be generous in your community so that the individuals decide whether to give it to the Little League team or to the soup kitchen.
Or keep it. Yes. What's the problem? I mean,
no, that's not what I'm saying. The problem is that's not generally happening.
No, it isn't generally happening, but that's how it should happen. Now, people could say, well, if I'm an employee and I'm not in the mood to go and build affordable housing, let's say, and the corporation is not taking part of my salary to do it, but it's encouraging me to do it, and therefore there's peer pressure on me to do it, therefore they shouldn't do it, then my response to that is you must be a fairly weak individual if you feel like you are forced to either give up money or time for something you don't want to do. That's not the company's problem, and that's not the charity's problem.
You've never been in a
problem.
position where your boss is the chairman of the United Way Committee.
Well, if my boss is look, I'm not trying to dismiss this, Scott. That's what's great about the show. We have a chance to talk things through, and I'm not issuing edicts. I'm trying, as we've said many times, trying to find a way to make these principles that we live by work in the real world. So if it turns out that an employer is putting a great deal of personal pressure on you to do that, then that is coercion. It's coercion. And he might as well have taken the money out of your paycheck the way that unions do. And just, not that I particularly need to stick this knife, and actually come to think of it, yes, I do. When the laws have been changed to say that unions can no longer deduct the dues before the person gets their check. In other words, if the person has to actually write a check to the union, I think union membership goes down to something like 8% of what it was prior to that. So again, it's very simple. Charity is a good thing. Charity from the heart, voluntary giving out of a sense of kindness or generosity or gratitude is a noble emotion. Being forced to do this with an appeal to that noble emotion is either coercion or manipulation, and it's exceedingly low. And so you're left with this situation where in a situation where the society that I want to live in which we largely do live in, determines I have a choice to do all of these things. I have a choice to keep the money. I have a choice to work for a corporation that's known to be a rapacious, raper of the planet and destroyer of children. And I have a choice to do all those things. But to say that it is inherently bad for a corporation to take its own money and spend it on things, either for the advertising value or not, it's nobody's business. It's the corporation's business. The money is owned by, we're talking profits, as I said. Those profits are owned by the shareholders and the board of directors representing the shareholders. And if they decide they want to spend their money on doing something like that, then I say, great, fantastic, good for them. And it's in the American character to do that. We're astonishingly generous people as individuals and as corporate entities. The only thing I object to is when somebody tells me we're really good people and so we're going to take half of your paycheck in order to show the rest of the world what good people we am.
This reminds me, and I'll wrap it here. This reminds me of when I worked for a division of a major corporation, one of the biggest corporations that you've probably heard of. And I was on a committee to draft a vision statement for that division of the company. And it was a frustrating process. And I kept asking questions. And finally, in frustration, I asked the chairman of the committee, who happened to be the president of the division, I said, are we crafting a vision statement that will be a kind of an idea by which we live our lives here at this company? Or is this just for the plaque in the lobby?
Press release, yeah.
Without blinking, without pausing, he looked at me and he said, it's for the plaque.
You have to admire that on some level in the same way you admire the efficiency of a great white shark.
And ladies and gentlemen, all I wanted to say is that the principles here at BillWhittle.com are not for the plaque. They're for daily life. And that's why Bill Whittle Now is so important. That's why our members have put forward the money to help to produce this voluntarily with no peer pressure. They are contributing voluntarily to this enterprise to make it possible for us to play out these principles in real life. And we are grateful for that. If you'd like to join their storied ranks, you can go to BillWhittle.com and click the Become a Member link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making it happen.